now it's time for Alex. Alex gave a great talk at the last Replicon, which was the 10 features you need to know about. Now this is 10 more features you need to know about. So with that, Alex, I will hand it over to you. So you can screen share.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Grant. So yeah, like Grant said, I'm Alex Parker. I'm a senior product manager here at Replicated, and here is the sequel to last quarter's talk, 10 more features that you need to know about. And if you tuned in last quarter and watched, you'll know that I just kind of hit you with 10 different features. So this time I've decided to organize it a little bit and walk through a couple different categories of like the workflow of using Replicated and highlight a couple different features in each of these categories to help you use Replicated more effectively through each of those parts of your lifecycle workflow working with Replicated. So we'll talk about some features that'll make it easier for you to iterate on your release when you're developing and making changes and testing those changes. We'll talk about some features to help you ship out a new release to your customers, get people updated, things like that. We'll talk about Kubernetes installer clusters and some features to help you if you're shipping to customers that don't have an existing Kubernetes cluster and you're using our Kubernetes installer. We'll talk about some features with troubleshooting to make it easier for you to do disconnected troubleshooting and help your customers with issues in their environments. And then we'll have a couple features that are coming soon, alpha and beta features that we'll highlight. And if anybody's interested in those, we'd love some participation and feedback from you all on those as well. So let's get started with some features to help you iterating on your release. So when you're working with Replicated and you're shipping your software, you're working on your release, the standard process you might use for testing changes to a release is to go into your vendor portal, create a release, make all the necessary changes there, save that release, and then promote it to one of your release channels. Then you'd have some sort of testing development environment with an admin console installed there, and you check for updates and pull in that new release that you just promoted, and then deploy that release and test those changes, make sure everything worked out well, and then rinse and repeat that process. But this can be super time consuming, especially if you're making little tweaks, you're just trying to test little things and you've got to promote releases 5, 10, 15 times as you're going through testing. This can take a lot of time. So there's actually a faster way to do this, or a couple different ways that you can speed this up. One is that you can preview some of your changes right from the vendor portal without even needing to save and promote a release and then update to that new release. So right from the vendor portal, you can preview your config screen, and you can also preview your application icon. So we'll show both of these things real quick, but for the config, this is an example of what this looks like. So it's a little bit condensed, obviously, because it's shown within the vendor portal, but we have a config preview that's right inside the vendor portal. You can click on your config custom resource in the vendor portal. Then you click on the config help pane on the right side of the screen. You go to the config preview, and you can preview a fully functioning config page. It's going to look identical to what it looks like in the admin console. And it even does live rendering, like with conditional config items, which I'll show in this demo here, an example of that. So here I'm just going to my config resource, go to the config preview, and then I've got this example of my config. And then I can click on use ingress, that pops up a new conditional config item. So I've got like a fully functioning config page here that is going to happen dynamically as I make changes. So I can test all those config changes without ever even having to leave the vendor portal and ship a release and whatnot. The same thing is true for your application icon. So this is my amazing guestbook icon here that I found on some free icon website. You can basically go through the same process of clicking on your application custom resource in the vendor portal and then looking at the help pane on the right side of the screen. And you can preview an existing icon. So if you already have an icon specified inside of your application custom resource, whether that's like an HTTP URL or a base64 data URL, it'll show you a preview of that icon already. So that's what this picture is showing here. But if you want to preview a different icon, test some changes, you can preview a new icon either by uploading an image, or you can paste a URL in there and preview that way. And then if you want to use that image, that icon in an air gap environment or in any environment, really, you can copy the base64 data URL. We'll encode it for you. You can copy it, paste it into your custom resource, and then use the icon like that. So a quick demo of that as well. I've already got a URL in here, so we're already previewing that icon, but I can also preview a different icon. In this case, I'm going to upload an image. It's going to base64 encode it for me. I can copy it, paste it into here, and, and test all my changes right there without ever leaving the vendor portal again. So that's two examples of how you can preview your changes right from the vendor portal. But obviously, there's a lot of changes you're going to want to make that aren't config or icon previews. So there's another way that you can do this that's still more efficient than that initial method workflow we talked about, because you can iterate on a release right from your test environment. So there's no need to make changes in the vendor portal and save and promote releases and check for updates and that whole process. You can do it right from your test environment. So the way to do this is by using the kots download and the kots upload commands. So the kots download command lets you download the most recent version from an installation of the app manager, like in your test environment. So it'll download all the manifests, all the files that were used to create that release. Then just in like a local text editor on your machine, you can make all the changes that you want to make. And then you can use the kots upload page or command, which is basically going to upload that back into the admin console as a new version that you can then update to. And then you can test your changes without ever even leaving the development environment. So it cuts out all of that saving and promoting of releases, and it just makes it a quick download, make changes, upload process that you can iterate on much more quickly and efficiently to get things in the right state before you move on. So in case you forget those commands or don't know how to use them, it's pretty easy because we show you right here on the View Files tab. There's a modal that will give you the download command first. So I'm going to do that. This is just going to download all those files to my local machine here. And then for this example, I'm just going to add a new config option. So let's say I want to change up my config a little bit. I'm just going to add a couple new fields here. Probably fast forward a little bit through this. So I'm just adding this new item field here. I'm going to run the kots upload command that prints it out from the kots download command. That's going to upload that right back into the admin console. Then if I go over to my admin console again, go to my version history page, I've got a brand new version right here, kots upload, that I can deploy, test my changes. So if I go to edit config, I can see my new config item is already present there. So that's another great way for changes that you actually need to deploy or you need to look at in the admin console. This is a great way to just do it without having to go through the whole iteration process inside the vendor portal. So now let's talk about some features for shipping a new release. So there's a lot of things you might need to consider when you're shipping a new release. What kind of release it is, like is it a major version or a minor or a patch? What if something goes wrong with this release? What do you want your customers to do in that circumstance? Or is this a required release, like something that everybody has to update, like if you have a database migration or something like that? So when thinking about what kind of release it is, does this update apply to everybody? Or is it something that maybe only some of your customers need to update to? Like a patch release maybe, where only people who haven't updated past that minor version need to update to this. Our talk from last quarter highlighted semantic versioning and our support for that, which lets you ship patch releases so that only affected customers that need to update to that patch release are prompted to update. And I've got a link here. We'll share this out later. If you want to go back and watch that presentation again, you can get a little bit of context on the semantic versioning support. So what if something goes wrong when you ship this out? What do you want to do? Like when your customers update, should they be able to roll back to previous versions? Does your software support that? Well, the allow rollback field is in the application custom resource, and that determines whether your application supports rolling back. So if you set this to true, then your end users have the ability to roll back to a previous version. If an issue arises or whatever it might be, they'll have a rollback button inside of their version history page to be able to deploy prior versions of the application and roll back. Last quarter, we also talked about backup and restore, which would be another great option in this case. And again, I've got a link to that if you want to hear more about backup and restore and how to leverage that in a disaster scenario or something like that. And here's just a simple example of an application custom resource with the allow rollback field set to true. And then finally, is this release required? So sometimes there's a release that everybody has to upgrade, to this release. For example, if there's a migration that occurs in a particular release, and then every subsequent release is going to assume that new schema in your database, so everyone's got to go through this to perform that migration. How can you enforce that everybody updates to that particular release? And then furthermore, once people have updated, how can you stop them from rolling back? Even if your app supports rollback, if those old versions aren't going to work with that new schema, how can you stop people from rolling back and getting into a sticky situation again? Well, you can set a release as required when you promote it to a channel to accomplish just that. And when you set a release as required, it's going to do two things for you. First of all, any subsequent releases that you promote to that channel, your customers aren't going to be able to update to those releases until they first update to that required release. So it serves as a gate that everybody has to go to before they can keep on, moving down the track of upgrading. And also, once a customer has upgraded to a required release, they're not going to be able to roll back to any previous versions. Even if your app supports rollback with that flag we just talked about, they're going to be stopped at that required release and be unable to roll back prior to that because of changes that might have been made in that release that won't be supported with prior releases. So there's two ways to do this. We've got the vendor portal, and when you have the promote modal up, there's a checkbox here to say prevent this release from being skipped during upgrades, and that's going to make this a required release. But if you automate your workflow and you use the replicated CLI, there's also a required flag, which will set the release as required and do much the same thing just from the CLI. All right, now we'll talk about Kubernetes installer clusters. So if you're shipping to customers that don't have existing clusters, you're using our Kubernetes installer. Here's a couple features or a couple things to keep in mind. So storage is a really big part of any Kubernetes cluster, and Replicated's Kubernetes installer currently supports several different storage providers. We support Rook, we support Longhorn, we support OpenEBS. So which one of these should you use? And what is our recommendation for your specific circumstance? Well, our recommendations have changed recently. So I've got a little table here just to show you. So if you're shipping your application as a single node Kubernetes installer cluster, then we're always going to recommend you use OpenEBS local PV. It's a lightweight and simple storage solution that works great for a single node. And if you're shipping a multi-node cluster, we still recommend OpenEBS local PV, except in the circumstance that your application requires distributed storage. So if your app isn't going to support replicating your data across those nodes at the application level and you need the infrastructure to do that, Rook is going to be our recommendation in that case. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but we do have an upcoming talk from Mark, our CTO, where he's going to talk about storage. So he'll dive a little bit more into some of these storage considerations. But a recent feature that we released, or really a series of features, was that we were looking at Rook, and it's a pretty heavyweight solution if it's not needed. And the app manager required distributed storage in multi-node clusters. And we felt that that was a big requirement to put unless it's absolutely needed, especially when some vendors' applications don't require distributed storage themselves. So our goal was to make the app manager work with a lightweight local PV solution. And then apps that require distributed storage can continue to use it, but a lot of them don't, and they'd be able to leverage this lighter solution just like the app manager can. So a couple changes that we made are, one, the app manager is now using a database called SQLite instead of Postgres. And there's a migration that's going to occur automatically in version 1.89 and later to move all the data out of Postgres and into SQLite. And the MinIO add-on for the Kubernetes installer now supports running in distributed mode to replicate the data across nodes as well. So by combining those two changes, the app manager now supports running on OpenEBS local PV in multi-node clusters, as long as the vendor's app supports that as well. So that has kind of opened up this lighter weight storage solution that we're recommending as long as your app supports it. And we have a lot of migrations in place, and we're working on more to be able to help you get there if this is your circumstance. So any vendor that's currently using Rook or Longhorn on a single node or on a multi-node cluster and their app doesn't require that, they should migrate to OpenEBS. It's going to be more supportable and just better for them in the long run. And then anyone using Longhorn also should, but their app requires distributed storage. Like I said before, Rook is the recommendation in that case. So we encourage you to migrate over to Rook there. We've already got a migration path from Rook to OpenEBS. So anyone that's on any version of Rook, even a really old version like 1.04, which a number of our customers are on, we have a migration path for you to be able to get you over to OpenEBS. And we've got migration paths forthcoming for Longhorn to OpenEBS and Longhorn to Rook to try to get you there. So that was probably a lot of information. Like I said, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a subsequent talk. But if you're a vendor that's using Rook or Longhorn and wants to learn more about this, just get in touch with us and we can help kind of figure out your situation and get you into the right recommendation there. So the Echo add-on is another Kubernetes installer feature we'll talk about. Echo stands for Embedded Curl Cluster Operator. And it performs operations to maintain the health of a Kubernetes installer cluster. So we really strongly encourage you to include the Echo add-on in your Kubernetes installer and keep it up to date if you're using the Kubernetes installer, because it does so many things and it's going to save you and your customers from a lot of potential headaches. So a few of the tasks that the Echo add-on performs: it will force delete pods on unhealthy nodes so that they can be rescheduled to healthy nodes. It'll automatically rotate certificates for the registry add-on and for the Kubernetes control plane. It can maintain an internal load balancer for the Kubernetes API server for multi-node clusters. So if you've been with us for a while and you are shipping your application as a multi-node cluster to your customers, you might know that we used to require you to bring your own, or your customers, I should say, to bring your own load balancer that supported hairpinning. We've removed that requirement, and now the Echo add-on can do that load balancing for you so that your customers don't have to bring their own load balancer. And then the Echo add-on is also a crucial part of running MinIO and Requilite in distributed mode to support those storage changes that we just talked about on that last feature. So here's the Echo add-on in a Kubernetes installer. If you're not using this and you are using the Kubernetes installer, please take a look at it and add it. It's going to save you a lot of work, and it's just a great feature of the Kubernetes installer. So now troubleshooting. We've got one more feature to talk about on the troubleshooting front, which is a really cool new feature we came out with recently. So when you're looking at support bundles, so, many of you probably know that Replicated always recommends using support bundles for disconnected troubleshooting. We use them all the time for any support issue that comes up. And support bundles have a lot of textual information in them. So there's a lot of files and a lot of things that you can read and parse to try to find issues. You can do that in the admin console. You can look at it in the vendor portal. You can look at it, download it and look at it in a text editor. But that doesn't necessarily replicate how you would troubleshoot if you had access to a customer's environment. It's not really a Kubernetes native way of troubleshooting necessarily. So we came up with a tool called sbctl or sbcontrol that stands for support bundle control. And it's a command line tool for examining Kubernetes resources in a support bundle. And here's a link to the GitHub repository. It's open on GitHub if you want to take a look at it. So how does this work? Well, basically, sbctl starts a local API server using the support bundle, and it gives you a kube config that you can export to target that API server. And then that enables you to run kubectl commands against the support bundle as if it was a Kubernetes cluster. So, and there's also an interactive mode that'll do all of that stuff for you and just make it easier to use. So this just gives you a great Kubernetes way to do this and run kubectl commands against the support bundle as if you were actually looking at your customer's environment. So, you might normally want to get nodes or get pods and then look at logs for a specific pod and kind of dig through that using the kubectl. You can do that. The benefit here is that you can look at a support bundle in a truly Kubernetes native way. And we're looking to integrate this into Troubleshoot in the future so that it's even easier to use and you don't have to download, a separate project to do that. So let's take a quick look at sbctl here. So I'm running the sbctl shell command and I'm passing in a support bundle. And this is going to start a new shell that targets that support bundle as a Kubernetes cluster, in theory. And then I'm able to run commands against that. So I'm not running against a real cluster here. I'm running all of these commands against the information that's inside of that support bundle, getting logs for specific pods, and then, exiting out of it when I'm done. So it's just a great Kubernetes native way to engage with a support bundle instead of having to parse through text files and different things like that to accomplish the same thing. All right, real quick, we've got 2 features that are coming soon that I want to highlight. One is an alpha feature called custom domains. So if you want to completely brand the replicated stack, remove any customer-facing replicated endpoints from your installation and your customer environments, then custom domains do just that. They allow you to create aliases for some of the replicated customer-facing endpoints, our registry endpoint, our proxy service, the download portal, and then replicated app, which is used to pull updates into your customer environments and things like that. So any private images or images that are pushed to the replicated registry, we're going to rewrite those image names using your custom domains instead of the replicated registry and proxy service domains that are typically used in the admin console. Your customers will be able to access the download portal on a custom domain of your choosing instead of get.replicated.com. And for replicated app, any new releases are going to be pulled into that customer's environment from your custom domain instead of from replicated app. So this is just an extension of our branding capabilities to help let you put your brand, your domains in front of your customers. And then finally, the last thing I'll touch on is the Flannel add-on, which is a Kubernetes installer add-on that's currently in beta. It's a new networking add-on for Kubernetes installer clusters and is going to move to general availability in the near future, excuse me. Weave has been our networking add-on for some time, but that's been all but abandoned upstream. So we're moving towards Flannel as our go-forward recommended networking add-on in the future. And we're going to be supporting migrations over to that as this moves into general availability. So that was 10 features, 10 more features, I should say, that you need to know about Replicated. I see there was some activity in the chat. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, so let me take a look there. But if anyone else has questions, feel free to let me know.